Namaste all, and welcome to our continuing evenings of Sraddhalu. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste, Narad, and welcome to everyone.
Today promises to be a very special evening because Sraddhalu will share some of his learning on the way, of course, with questions also from the viewers. Namaste all.
Namaste. Thank you. Thank you, Narad. I would like to share a few personal experiences which over the years I've had to go through as part of my growth, experience, learning, whatever one may call it. And just a moment, I want to switch the recording. Many of my early experiences were not the result of personal effort. As I have many times shared, a lot of what I experienced was the consequence of the work done by my teacher, MP Pandit, on me. And perhaps it helped that I was very open, that I was very receptive to him. I remember a point of transition which was extremely important, which made perhaps all the difference in terms both of what he was able to transmit and what I was able to receive. It was just after I had completed my formal education in the ashram school. And at the time, I was not sure what would happen, what I was supposed to do. I knew I would be in the ashram, and my teacher was supportive. We normally start the school sessions on 16th of December, and the school session ends October 31st. And in between are the holidays, November and half of December. So a lot of people who used to formally join the ashram after completing their studies would wait the holidays and then start their formal work in the community after from December on. I said, well, I've always been a part of the ashram community. I don't need to wait. I just start immediately. And so I went to the person who was in charge, Ravindraji, and he was supposed to give a lot the work. And he was known to be a bit of an odd person, and he sometimes took pleasure in giving people uncomfortable work or pushing them to their limit in terms of their capacity. But I said, okay, that's how it is, and we kind of tune ourselves in to accept whatever comes your way as eventually representing or representative of mother's intentions or will. So I went to him and I said, I don't need to wait. I'm willing to start. He said, oh, very good. And then he put out a little torn piece of paper and scrawled something on it. And he said, go and give this to the dining room person in charge. And from tomorrow morning, you can start there. I saw what was written there. The person who told me was, it was the morning when they were serving food to the servants' carrier service. And in terms of atmosphere, it was one of the worst. You had all these people of a very mixed and sometimes a very low vibration and a lot of agitation, the violence, disturbance in the atmosphere. All that is now stopped, but at that time it was there, it was available, it was not at all a comfortable experience, having seen that from far, and I was supposed to help in serving food at that point. So I took the note to my teacher and I said, this is what he has given me. He looked at it and then he said, no. He was very clear the reason why. He said, this will harm the spiritual growth because it would expose to something contrary. I said, okay. I said, what do I do? He said, you wait and tell him that you would rather wait before starting. So I went and just said that and left it at that. As it turned out, about a few weeks later, Jayantilal from the archives asked for me to work in the archives. He approached Ravindraji, and because I was conversant with computers, and so he needed someone like that. And so it started in a space which was much more clear, calm, open, and rarefied compared to what would have been otherwise. But at that moment, when my teacher told me, "What do you want to do?" I had a choice. Should I go for the archives, or there were a couple of other options in certain departments of the ashram, which also had shown interest. And I knew I had a choice. The choice would have been mine, but consciously I put myself in relation to what is it that the mother wants. And because I trusted my teacher, I said to him, "I choose whatever you decide." And consciously, I faced all personal preference. And then he said, "Archives." I might probably not have leaned towards that. He said, "Archives." And I said, "Okay." But what happened in that moment that I consciously effaced all personal preference, I opened myself to the mother's consciousness. I felt that flowing through him. And I said, "Whatever you choose, whatever you decide." That shift that took place as if set a stamp, which then continued for about 1.5 years. From that day on, practically, it was that experience which I've narrated. He would touch me on the forehead every day, and before I went to the archives, and I would feel this initially just a warmth, joy, clarity, light. And after a few weeks down, each time he touched like that, just one finger on the forehead as I would bow to him in the ashram office, just one brief touch. After a while, I noticed that I felt as if like a golden liquid ball entering, flowing down, and when it reached the chest center, it burst into this beautiful love, warmth, light, golden liquid bursting out. And I would come out of his office and look around, and the whole world was so beautiful. Everything was so perfect. The flowers, the walls, everything was conscious. The air was conscious. It was actually, he was drop by drop, literally cutting through and bringing forward the psychic influence in a strong way. And over a few days, weeks, it became stronger and stronger. And I remember one of the memories I had at that point was, oh, in this state, what does it feel like to think of someone who's like someone you dislike completely, equivalent of what could be an enemy? I didn't really have enemies, but someone I dislike. And the feeling was, oh, this is the person that I love to dislike, that I love to hate. It was still a love relationship. So I was living in that for about 1.5 years. Around the end of that 1.5 years, my teacher suddenly said to me that, I was at the time eating only raw food. It was one of those things which fixation of the mind. And my teacher said, "You don't know what the future will be like." And actually, I didn't know a few years down he would leave his body. But said, "So you should adapt yourself to regular food." And I said, "Okay." Then when I took the regular food, I had a reaction. I resisted. And that was like a wall or a veil which came in between and stopped that flow. And I want to point to this because it's so important. We are not conscious to what extent we are open, to what extent we close, to what extent we have hesitations or doubts. And these interfere in the flow that comes from the action of the grace of the mother's force or any help that comes from the spiritual higher realm, the divine consciousness. And that was the point where I could feel literally as if an intensity which was being built up suddenly diffused and softened, weakened. But during that 1.5 years was when I had the most powerful, the most deep and wide-ranging experiences which were infused. And I'm connecting it to the text that we have been reading of the siddhis, not so much as siddhis, but as normal operations of the spiritual consciousness. In the vyapti, where you feel this natural continuity of your consciousness with another, in which you literally feel the other person's influence coming into you and your influence flowing in them. That's the mechanism through which these experiences were transmitted. And as you've read Sri Aurobindo saying how the teacher transmits these experiences, and in the spiritual domain, there is so much that happens. But the receptivity allowed the thing to be imprinted more completely. And when the receptivity was reduced, it was as if less complete, less intense. Subsequently, so I'm not going to go too much into some of those experiences. Perhaps if there are questions, I will respond to them. But I want to move to my personal experiences after, because till then I was just receptive instrument. There would be an imprint, but I did nothing on my own in terms of an effort. It happened, I allowed it to happen with minimum distortion, dilution, or personal interference. Subsequent to his passing, which was a few years down only, maybe 1 or 2 years after, I found many other things happening where I had to be actively responsible, because I was no more in that state when I was protected and carried by his consciousness. That was diffusing. That was as if fading out slowly. And increasingly, the pressure of responsibility and work demanded that I take an active position. So it represented a major shift. In that shift, as I was going ahead, certain observations came and certain learning experiences, which is what I want to share largely. So one of the earliest significant experiences I remember, I was invited to speak in Samarpan guest house at the time, and there was a person there who was in charge of the guest house then, and he invited, I don't remember, he had given a particular topic, and I had gone. By then, I had already given some talks in the school as a student, subsequently in the Sri Aurobindo Society on various themes. One of these was technology of consciousness and all these. So these were not largely in the spiritual, psychological space. They were more in semi-technical and turning to the spirit generally. And this was the first time when it was a more completely spiritual orientation in content. And I remember as I was speaking, there was, of course, a certain preparation before of tuning in, centering the consciousness, opening oneself to a higher inspiration, and speaking. And at that point, after this, was the questions which came from the audience. There were questions. And at some point, a person asked, and it was a very odd and unusual question, very personal to that individual, where he asked, how or why does one feel, and a particular experience he described, which was emotional and a certain disturbance in the consciousness. And I was aware of what happened. I was ready to speak in answer. The mind moved and formed two distinct reasons, one which was general and one which was specific. And at that moment, I was about to say there are two reasons possible. So I was saying there are, and at that moment, as I'm holding these two, I'm seeing from beyond these two as if a third thing rising, like as if a thought dawning, rising from behind the horizon, as if something rising up. And as I'm about to say two, I say three reasons. And I was conscious in my mind, I knew nothing of what that third was. But because by then the training of keeping the mind quiet and not agitating or pushing was already somewhat in place, I held this state with faith, with conviction, with trust that it would be revealed as I came to it. So I start speaking of the first reason, which is very much in my consciousness and to some extent a product of my understanding of things. The second question, which was more coming from an insight, but still in the mind. So I start describing the second. And what was very clear, I'm describing this in some detail, I was conscious that if I hesitated, if I became disturbed, if I turned the mind to want to understand, if I got stressed of what is that third thing, it would break the link totally. I kept the same state of calm, equality, stillness in the mind, flowed into the second. As I completed the second, it's as if the third thing unpacked itself and revealed its content. I became conscious of the thing as if it opened up like a flower. using an analogy, but just and it was obvious what it was. And I started describing the third thing. I'm describing this because you appreciate here how important it is to have the first Chatushtaya, the first limb of the integral yoga, reasonably stable, which remember had the content of quieting the consciousness, deep peace, established in the consciousness, ability to silence the mind, obviously, to some degree, or holding the state of silence for a while, and then the deep peace that would then grow and deepen, and the equality, which was the base actually. So the Chatushtaya itself is named Samata Chatushtaya, the Chatushtaya of equality. Or Sri Aurobindo uses an alternate name, Shanti Chatushtaya, peace, Chatushtaya of peace. Almost as if we're not sure if it is we should use peace or equality, or actually what he wants to use as a word is the blend of both, but there's no exact word for this, so he's giving both names. And the full value of this you will understand in this kind of an experience, where the mind needed to stay equal, quiet, still, and allow the formation of the words and the thought forms to develop, waiting for the thing to unpack. And then the third unpacked itself and went on. So I remembered this for a long time. I said, this is nice, this is good. It's a sign that this is possible and it's within reach. I did not have an excitation about it. I did not have a disturbance about it, which again, you have to understand. If that comes, it breaks the thing which is forming. I give this as an example because it was one of those early experiences. Subsequently, many more things happened as I went along, some of which, as they come up, I would like to share. I was not speaking too much in those days. Occasionally, maybe once a year, I was invited to the society, and then somebody invited me to travel. I had not gone out of Pondicherry for all those years. I was invited. I think the first series were in Delhi. And then I was invited by one of the centers there to do a series of talks which were directed to young people, particularly reaching out to universities and colleges in Delhi. This was organized by a group of young people from the Gnostic Center at that time. And they had scheduled 2 to 3 talks a day sometimes and through 1 week. So it was quite intense, but the biology was capable of it. And one of the things which I used to experience at that time was every time that there would be the concentration and gathering for the talk, there would be also a kind of an afflatus, a descent, an intensification of the presence felt. So I was familiar with these things, being with my teacher through contact. During his talks, I would feel that same afflatus, that same intensity. And I said, oh, this feels so good. I'm happy to keep it. And so I use that and the intensity of that often as a reference for the state of, let's say, opening and receptivity. And afterwards, for the quality and the worth of the content which came through. So if at the end there was a strong, intense presence full of light, warmth, heat, deep joy of that particular grade, which I knew from contact with my teacher, I would say, yes, so this was good. It was worthwhile. But the measure was in terms of the impact in me, and not so much with others. And I'm sharing some things, you'll understand the value of it as we go along. So that was my only reference, and I kept it at that. And often that afflatus was enough to sustain the biology. One of the things I noticed, in order to hold and bring the consciousness into that state, there was a buildup of several days before. So if I had to travel to Delhi, about a week or two before, the mind would start tuning in and preparing. I have to prepare. And a kind of a gathering of awareness, gathering of intensity, gathering of power. I will use the word today looking back. The power of consciousness, the strength, intensity of consciousness was gathered. And then when I left for those things, it was at this one pointed full focus for the work to be done. So it would be a kind of a peak state, and sometimes 2 talks a day, some occasionally 3. So I would have this talk, we prepare, go to the next day. And because of this peak state, I was not conscious of how I was doing or what I was doing. The food intake would be quite low. So at the end of that week, I would have lost my weight, a few kilograms at least. I didn't need it, and it felt dulling. If to eat too much would bring down that dullness. So at that time, I'm not recommending this as a process. I'm just describing what happened and then the corrections which came later. So there would be this peak and then there would be this afflatus, and it was fine. And then there was one meeting which was organized. I believe it was Delhi University. Now the memory is vague, but and what they would do is they would put up these announcements. They would put a title, they would put an announcement and invite young students. They were young people, so it worked sometimes, and sometimes it did not work. And this was one of those examples where students had been invited, practically no one came. It was in a room which was used by the students during their breaks. So we were on a large table. There were a few students who were doing their work, and we had this talk. And then these people said, "Okay, we have this lecture." They did an announcement, and we had perhaps a dozen students who were sitting there. And I started to speak on a topic which they had pre-decided and announced. And as I'm speaking, I was feeling a distinct lack of connect. Now, it did not matter what I felt or what I received or the quality of what was transmitted. There was nobody receiving it on the other side. It was as if, water flowing off a duck's back type of feeling. It was not sticking. And that's an experience one has when people listen, they're held, you feel the difference. And I was feeling this gap. And after a while, some of them started looking around, and there was no compulsion for them to sit. Somebody got up and walked away, another started looking around, and I felt they were ready to leave. I said, it's not what I feel that matters. What's the point of this whole exercise? And so I started trying to feel. I tried to spontaneously from inside, there was an intensification, raising of the powell, voice, clarity of ideas amplified. And I'm trying as if to reach out. And then suddenly this thing comes, which says, as a thought, why am I sticking to this box? This box does not interest them. What does interest them? And so there was as if a spontaneous choice made to break that formation. The whole talk swung into a very different direction, content, and level of consciousness. Now, I'm going to explain this in a certain way. The initial state was much more mental, and these people, it didn't touch them. When it shifted a level, it touched emotions. And to me, that was uncomfortable. It was new. I was not used to speaking or communicating on that level. And there was an emotional content, but I let it happen. And it was as if in that something touched, gripped, and held. And this person who was hesitating, about to go, suddenly turned with his half body language, like half turned, and stayed on. And then slowly the body turned. After a while, a few people who were near the door came in and came together, and slowly a group gathered. And I'm looking back in retrospect after 30 years nearly, and I understand as I'm sharing the learning experiences which that brought. I realized there first, it's not what I feel. The purpose of this is to transmit something, to impact a change, to make some shift in their consciousness, in their worldview, in this case, to open them to a higher possibility, or, it was organized by a center, so connect to Sri Aurobindo's and Mother's writings and the activities of the center. But the idea was that they should feel, I want to know more, which used to happen. But in this case, I found that something missing. And the second thing I saw, I have a natural range of comfort of communication in which I live. I live in that level of consciousness. And there are ranges in which I don't live and I don't feel comfortable, but in which many people live. And there was a mismatch there. And when I allowed that whatever shift took place to happen, it went into a range which to me was uncomfortable, but for them was comfortable and necessary even to bring a hook. So here again, I'm going to touch upon these terms, Vyapti and Prakamya. If you remember, Vyapti is that perception of what comes into you and the affinity which is felt, in which what is happening in others, so to say, strikes on you, or which is felt in an empathy. Prakamya is when you are projecting, reaching out to perceive or to influence. So what happened at that point was there was this Vyapti, which is natural always in any communication you have. It may only be more or less, but it's always there. You're feeling the person is not interested. And then almost as a desperate reaching out to hold, to bring them back, and it's coming where I don't know how to do, and I'm as if the thing reaching out is not sticking, it's not holding, until the inspiration dropped the level to the grade that was needed, and there it hooked and pulled. To me, very unfamiliar, to them, very familiar and necessary to make that connect. So it was one of those very important learnings. Subsequently, I had occasion to see many people who are good speakers, or they are regularly doing programs like workshops, lectures, interactive, etc. And what they often do, they first try to make this connection. Not all are conscious of what they're doing. Many are, not all are. They will start, oh, what is your name? Introduce yourself. How are you? How did you come here? What are you looking for? And you're building a link of emotion, energy, interest, uh, some connection of on the vital level. And so they go through like that. They get people to introduce, build the rapport. Rapport is typically the word used in these things, where you feel each other connected, bonded somehow, or understanding in each other. And it's a prakamya process, really. But on that level, when I saw those things happening, to me, it was always very uncomfortable because it was involving emotions, vital energies, which I felt sticky. In the mind, it was so clear, pure, and impersonal. And that purity, that light of impersonality was for me very valuable. But I realized it was a lack of my capacity, something missing. And it should be possible to maintain that kind of purity even in these levels. So at that point, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to proceed. It happened, I let it happen, and I used those occasions as a learning experience. So uh, this was one of those turning points. I said, okay, I have to allow when it happens. I remember another incident. This was in Baroda and the center. And I had been given topics. So in those days, it used to be like that. They would give you a topic. It was a conference. We had many speakers. I had my topics. And I tuned into the topic and spoke whatever I had to. These were formal sessions. And then I told the organizers, I would like to do one more thing to reach out to young people. Because what I saw in many of these centers, that people who came were generally people who had retired from life. They had the free time, and maybe at that point they were looking for something of deeper interest or value. But you rarely saw young people. If at all some came, it was more to assist the older people. But I said, we have to reach out to young people. And for a few years, I had tried many times to pick topics which would attract them. And so here I said, I want to speak about science in Sri Aurobindo, or something to the effect relating to science. And I said, please reach out to your younger groups. Let's see if we can get them to come. So I had these formal talks, podium in the garden, whatever. And they were typically spiritual related themes. And then I had this one special talk. And I remember at that time the difference. In all these formal talks, I began always with an invocation. It helped me to center. It was also a way to invoke the presence and then flow into the topic. But when I sat for the talk on the science related topic, I was enthused and I started speaking. I said, the topic today I want to share is this. There was no invocation, there was no concentration, there was nothing of the things associated with the spiritual type for the young people. And afterwards, one of the participants came up to me, a young person. He said, this was so different. You are so different. There you were formal, distant, concentrated. Here you were informal, personal, close, no invocation. What is this? And that's when I realized, I was not conscious. I realized that, yes, it's true. I still valued very much that formality because it helped to bring a certain focus and an intensity. And this somehow informal was closer, but it did not have that kind of power intensity, which I valued so much. So all these were, remember, they were early experiences. I didn't have much experience. I didn't understand too much. I was just allowing the situation to educate and train me through the experiences, and sometimes through a lot of mistakes also. But one thing which was constant, and this was purely as a consequence of what had happened with the work that my teacher had done on me, that when I would concentrate, there was a one-pointedness, tuning in, and then something would click and I would feel ready and then only speak. and express. So often there would be a preparation with notes. If it was a technical topic, I would make notes and prepare something. And that was needed perhaps. But irrespective of that, there was this linking which used to happen. And if that did not happen, I would not speak. I would wait. And generally it happened. It was not such a big. Some days it would happen more, some days less. And then it was in a group in Bangalore where afterwards the person who was heading the school, he said something very interesting. He said, when you start speaking, it's as if you plug into something higher and then that starts flowing and then you're a totally different person. And I said, yeah, that's an accurate description. It made me conscious of something which was happening, but I was not perhaps aware of entirely. I would be in the poise, but yes, there was a plugging in which took place of some kind. And so it was like this, through interactions like this, that gradually I became aware of something. I didn't know how or what. I just knew it was right when it was right. That was all. And I had no one to tell me these things. Even the experiences my teacher imprinted, they were imprinted. He never said, do it like this is how it happens. That's all. That's all. So in this way, gradually certain things began to formulate and became clear. Among them, there was one of the most embarrassing experiences where I learned something the hard way. Since my focus in those days was the reference of what I felt. And that's the only thing which is important. I was a bit rigid, with blinders limiting my priority. So I was invited to some program in Bombay. Somebody was genuinely wanted to help. It was a Rotary program, a large number of people, several hundred. And then he said to me, don't make it too high, meaning too abstract. And I said, look, I'm going to do whatever happens. They like it, it's good. They don't like it, they don't invite me again. I don't care. Which is not the correct attitude, but that's how it was at that point. So I went there and I spoke. And they were all a raucous audience. They've just been introduced, they're waiting. And I began to speak, and the level hit because I was always aiming for the highest that I can reach. Without that, it's pointless. So it hit, and suddenly there was a stillness, silence. And then after a while, it's like people's eyes start glazing. Some of them get drowsy, sleepy. Some people start yawning. And it has nothing to do with what I'm saying. It has to do with the quality of the presence which is invoked. And looking back, of course, it was embarrassing. That's exactly what my friend had told me. Don't make it too high. I was still speaking things which were accessible logically, verbally, in content, but the quality and power of the presence which was invoked was too high. So it was an interesting learning experience that you may want to reach your whatever the highest that is your reference, that may not be what they want or are capable of receiving or holding. And if inappropriately done, you'll find this effect that people start getting as if blurred. The intellect becomes slightly blurred, kind of a whiteout of a higher grade of consciousness, feeling too much. And the body then associates it with yawning, sleepiness. When I finished, they all came back to normal. So I observed this not once, it happened a couple of times, several times in different spaces, different degrees. And I said, what do I do about it? And I had no one to tell me this is what you do. And I didn't want to compromise the content or the quality of the attunement. So I learned the hard way that you have to be able to tune into their level, even if at the loss of that grade of luminosity or clarity of the consciousness flowing. It can still flow, but in substance of a lesser grade, if that is what is needed, to be able to access them there. And my reference was, if I listen to this, will I be happy? No, I won't be. What will I be happy with? And I was always aiming for that, which would be the highest. And this does not work. So you have to understand what is the goal. What is the intention here? You want them to receive something, go back with something valuable that will change their lives. If you say, oh, they just touched a higher light and it doesn't change their life because they can't hold it, it's not going to stay. So these are things I learned painfully. And you'll see a lot of this we understand in the passages we read of Sri Aurobindo when, for example, he describes that how when a teacher communicates something through this contact of the Vyapti, Prakamya, or it's the method by which you can transmit experiences, you can transmit anything, if the person can receive and hold and make his own. And that's critical. So the ability to tune in to the requirement of the person without losing your source, let's say, but still in terms of the substance you transmit, the grade you transmit, the ability to tune into that, and then also measure how much they can contain, how much they can receive, how much they can contain, and how much they can make their own. You feel that. So these are all things learned in time and through painful, difficult, sometimes frustrating learning experiences. But I'm sharing this in the hope that, first of all, it will elucidate examples of which we have seen, but on a more mundane, accessible level, but also that I hope it will help many of you in your own journey when you have your own experiences of this kind, both on the receiving side as well as on the transmitting side. So it will help to understand, and perhaps you may skip some of these, let's say, mistakes or lack of understanding that I had there. It grew gradually. And I have mentioned in a different place the turning point, which came for me, which was a very painful transition, which was also what I can look back and best and describe as the breaking of the spiritual ego. I've mentioned this in passing a few times, but in one of the discussions, I had gone in some great depth describing the full experience. And last time when I mentioned it in passing, there was a question from Rajarshi in the chat box where Rajarshi wrote, does anyone know which is the episode in which Sraddhalu talks about this painful phase? So I looked it up and found it is in the Evenings with Sraddhalu 168. And the topic there was Healing Childhood Trauma Part 2. And the incident itself is narrated in some detail from the minutes and seconds count of 51:49, so 51 minutes, 49 seconds, up to 1 hour, 22 minutes and 25 seconds. So if it interests you, do take a look. I won't elaborate, I won't repeat that in too much detail here. But it was one of those things which later when I read, I understood from mother's description. She says the spiritual ego is the most difficult and it has to be broken by blows of hammer. And I actually experienced those blows during that period every day for nearly 2.5 years. And it was really, the biology was pushed to its limit. And it was one of those most painful passages where I knew she's doing it. And I would stand before her and say, do what you have to do. But I can't look at you. It's too painful. Why are you doing this? Why are you torturing me? And it was at that time I had many interesting experiences. One of these, which I've narrated, where I had a talk with a school and 1,000 children would be there. And I'd spoken to them before. I wake up in the morning and I'm going through this very difficult phase. And I look at my own life and everything. And I say, the only thing I can say to them is life is not worth living. But that's all I experience. That's all I know. It's in this intensity of the pain. Obviously, I won't say that, but what else can I say? I can't just make up a story if I don't feel the truth of it. And still, I kept the faith, I kept the trust. Okay, whatever it is, it's not my problem, it's your problem. So I go up to there's a stage, and there are 3 steps, 1, 2, 3. And the third step, when I come on the stage, I felt the whole power flowing down, filling the whole vessel, mind, body, life, emotion, everything being filled with that afflatus and power. And I'm sitting there exactly as before it used to be. And there's a full, pure, clear transmission of whatever I wanted to share, nice interaction with the students. I come out of that and I'm coming down the steps and I'm saying, wow, at least I can hold this. And 1, 2, 3, I touch the ground and shoop, like a vacuum cleaner, everything is sucked out. I'm empty again. Filled for the work, emptied immediately after, and left empty for days, weeks. Filled whenever required, and immediately emptied again and again and again, until it was as if in the biology, the message was fixed in. Nothing is worth it without that. This vehicle in itself is pointless, meaningless, shell. It's a shell, hollow shell. Filled with that, it is worthwhile. Without that, it is just a shell. It was a very painful passage, but What it did was it broke some of those things which I had before, which I've described earlier, where I said, it doesn't matter. I don't care what they think. I will do whatever I have to do, my best. And all the things just broke. So in the breaking itself, it left a kind of a vacuum, and things had to be rebuilt gradually over time. Many preconceptions had to be dissolved. I'd grown up as if with blinders, like a horse, and not even think outside this. All those had to be broken so that I could become more supple, more free, etc. So that experience I've narrated in detail. I wouldn't go into it too much now. But the point being, after that, many things changed. And one of the key changes I realized was the gap which I had between the mind and the emotional layers, where I felt the emotions, not so pure, clear, that broke. Now, it broke in two ways. Something of the clarity may perhaps touch the lower, but also something of the stickiness of the lower rose into the higher, but the boundary was broken and I couldn't hold it anymore. And the result was necessarily it allowed something to be transmitted also through emotions. And that was very important. And it taught me something that you want to be an instrument, you have to be all the way through top to bottom, pure, clear, transparent to the force. You can't say, I'll be an instrument here and I will not do those other things because it's uncomfortable for me or I'm incapable of that, isn't it? So if we are all going to be eventually conscious instruments to the divine will, entirely in the whole of us, well, all those parts eventually have to be opened, and it does not matter if for a while you have to go walk through the mud. In walking through the mud, you make the effort to open and do whatever has to be done. And so this was one of those very important transition points, after which I found the ability to engage with that kind of audience or with that need in the group was much better. I could connect emotionally, I could feel, resonate, transmit, etc. So now I'm coming to something very important. This ability to transmit. Again, I've shared many times before the incident which happened with Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan, where she narrated an incident and she hardly spoke and she transmitted the pure experience. And I said, wow, this I should be able to do. So, and how? I don't know. But it happened gradually subsequently when these barriers were broken and things began to open. But I'll share some things which were helpful. So very early on when I was speaking, and especially when the group was large, my mother shared an experience and a guideline and an advice, I will say. So she said that when she was in college, she had to give public talks, and she would narrate how when she would go on the stage, there would be a pin drop silence. And even there were boys who would be normally raucous and try to harass or distract the women, they would become all silent. And she held the group and she would narrate this. And then she said what she would do before she started, she would stand on the stage and with her gaze, look at the whole audience and the boundary of the farthest edge all around the room. Sweep as if the whole room all around, sweep in the consciousness, wait, and then there would be pin drop silence, and then only she would start speaking. When she narrated that, I realized now in retrospect, something of that thing was transmitted. Now I understand at that time I didn't have the full appreciation of what it meant, but I knew what it was experientially because it was a transmission. I didn't understand fully here, but I knew what it was and I did that and I felt the benefit of it. What it did, so I was, for example, in some university, there's a large group, it's a big hall, sweep with the gaze, and I would focus on the boundary extreme and the content inside, which she probably did with the whole content. But what it did was in my consciousness, I became aware of all of these people. And inherently, the inherent Vyapti was active. If I'm aware of them, I feel them. If I'm not aware of them, I don't feel them, isn't it? If I feel them, there is also the reverse transmission as well as reception. Where you receive, you can transmit. You can't transmit where you do not have a touch or a contact, isn't it? So what it helped me, and I suppose it might help some of you if you have to ever do that. If you're giving a lecture of information, I've done a research, here are my results. We did this was the result, etc. You do with your PowerPoint slide. And such people often they're looking at the slides, not looking at the audience, pointing to this, and occasionally looking at the audience, giving information. Information is good. Someone takes a picture, they have all the information they need. You were not even needed, perhaps. You could have sent a recording, or even you could have removed that, just put a text. Send me a text, I will read out. Send me an email, I will read it. What was the point of your being there? And what often would happen, even in these kinds of where scientific lectures were given, I would interact with the scientist afterwards, and there I would feel as if I've drawn much more than in their presentation, because you felt the person, you felt the motivation, you felt the content of their experience, their joy, their pursuit, their thought, content, etc. So if you were just doing an informational transmission, none of this is important. You don't care who's there, you don't care they're interested, you did your part, you walked away. But if the goal is to transmit something, and it can be at the very least an inspiration. I had once a lecture with soldiers. And one of the things which I noticed there, the moment you spoke about sacrifice for the country, all of them had tears in their eyes. All of them. Why? Because implicit somewhere inside them, they know they are ready to die for the country. And they may die. And it can happen tomorrow. And if it happens tomorrow, they will not meet their family. And they're ready to do this. It's all there. It's just behind. You scratch the surface, it's just there. You talk to them, it rises up. What do you do with such people? What do you want to transmit to them? What can you give them? Anything you would do would be insufficient in face of this which they are ready to do. So what would you do? In any case, the point, my point was, I have something to give which is valuable, that has to stay with them. Then it cannot be information with a PowerPoint presentation. So even if I have a PowerPoint presentation, which I've done very rarely, maybe 2 or 3 times, maybe even less, maybe 1 or 2 times, where some information had to be placed, I would still speak, and that is there only secondarily. The transmission happens when you connect. So Vyapti is absolutely essential. The Prakamya is implicit. I never tried consciously to do anything like that. I just allowed it to happen, or the intensity, let it resonate and flow. I never tried to manipulate it in a way. At best, the capacity grew as a consequence of the practice itself. But being with those people, for example, what will you transmit? What can you give them? Your gratitude, your love, you share their love for the country. You share the willingness to sacrifice something, but something which awakes in them something higher, deeper, truer, and you leave them with that. That would be the goal, isn't it? So what you say is, now you have to go the other way. Start with what it is you want to transmit, and then say what you need to for that purpose. So again, I come to an example. This was in a talk in Bangalore, which was organized by one of the youth wings of the RSS. And RSS, as you know, is highly dedicated to national service, selfless service. The name itself, RSS, Rashtriya Swayam Sevak, self-service to the nation. The whole goal of their training is you dedicate your life to service to the nation, and nation includes not only Divine Mother, who is Mother India, but also her children. And so they are very much involved in all these kinds of social activities. Wherever there are natural calamities, they will go and serve and organize. And the goal is organized society for service. So they had a program. And one of the things I used to do in those days when these programs, I can say anything which I want. What do they want? Why have they invited me? So I would normally go to the person who invited me or who was heading the program and say, what do you want me to speak about? Even if they've given a title, what do you want me to speak about? And I would use that moment of what they say as the tuning to catch the inspiration which they held, catch a glimpse of that, and let that be the initiator of whatever flowed. So I went to this person who was senior RSS person. I said to him, what do you want me to speak about? And he looked at me blankly first. Nobody had asked him this question. They used to organize it. And then he thinks, and he says, just that, love for the country. And he had tears in his eyes. That was the entry point. So I took that and I made that the inspiration to be transmitted. I don't remember, perhaps it was recorded, but at the end of that whole session, everybody had tears in their eyes. I said, okay, mission accomplished. That thing which he held was transmitted. The link person in between is all that. He just did that. He amplified it or transmitted it. But one of the things which I learned over time was what they go in terms of change, in terms of growth, is more important than what I felt. So it was a complete reversal of what I used to do before. And the transition itself took place in ways which are difficult to explain. One of the important transition points, this was when I was giving talks. So I formally started regular talks, weekly talks around the year 2000. It was at Savitri Bhavan, and it was the synthesis of yoga. We had started at that point. And that was the first time I took fixed weekly. Subsequently, I started the Savitri when we were playing Panditji's videos. At some point where he ended, I began the Savitri classes. So we had 2 talks going every week. And that's when the regularity of it forced me to face with certain issues. One of those issues was, in my own state, I'm varying day to day. Certain days are completely exteriorized because of pressure of work. You don't have a moment to step back because demand of urgent things. Other days, there are emotional disturbances, psychological disturbances, tensions of problems of certain types, and they affect you. What happens in that, if you go in that state, how do you tune in? You can't. So I learned quickly, and again, I leave this as the value of the first Chatushtaya. Irrespective of your current state, you should be able to disengage disturbance of mind, disturbance of emotions, pain in the body, disengage, center yourself in whatever poise you choose or what is required for the work. In this case, if I had to speak. So center yourself in that poise to the extent that those disturbances cease to affect you. And then be a transparent instrument in that part, in that state for those few minutes. You should be able to make the separation. This is absolutely essential. Now, you don't have to hold this for too long. Maybe you have to hold it for a few minutes, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, whatever it is. So you should be able to say, this pain which you're feeling, you should be able to say, I'll come back to you, I'll deal with it later. For now, shift to this part, completely separate from it. Sometimes your body may be in intense pain. Sometimes your body may be dull and sleepy, and you should be able to pull back and find that part in you which is not dull and sleepy, and then open to that. So what was happening at some point, I was going through a very difficult patch where I was under pressure on many levels. And particularly that day and a few minutes or hours before, there's a very strong emotional disturbance which had hit. It was so strong that I even felt as if I would not be able to hold my concentration. I think my battery has gone low. Just a moment, I'll need to plug in the charge. Pardon me for the interruption. Okay. So I was in a very disturbed state, and there was no way I could gather myself. I was struggling. Even if I gathered, it held momentarily, and I would slip back. I would held momentarily, slip back. It was that sticky. Maybe if I had a little more time, but it was time. I had a session. I had to speak because I was already in these regular fixed classes. I could not even read the text. If I tried to read it, I couldn't understand anything. It was that extent of dullness and clouding that had happened from this disturbance. And I go to the session, I go to the class, and I pray. So we would start the class with a short chant of Om, collective chant. I do that, and as before, just trusting in the grace. And then I open my eyes. I have nothing to say. And then certain words formed, and first sentence formed. And then I have nothing more to say. And I'm waiting, and the second sentence formed. I have nothing left to say. And the third sentence forms. And it went on and on and on. I think it was a little over an hour, maybe 1.5 hours. It went like that. And what came through was so, it had force, it had power, it had punch. And when it completed, it linked back to the start in a way with the structure and beauty of the structure of the content that I could never have intended or imagined or planned for. And it was received only in pieces, one sentence at a time, literally. And again, it was blank. And in the blank, another sentence. And in the blank, another sentence. It was fascinating. It was fascinating, really. And then I realized all the preparation I was doing, where I would read the text, prepare, how can I give, what example shall I give for this, what example for that? All those things were good. They, so to say, prepared the mind to be a vehicle for whatever the inspiration could pick, and it would sometimes draw upon those. But very often, the best talks were the ones where I had the least preparation, because the inspiration had fluidity and would draw upon things and structure them. Wherever I had prepared too much, the structure was rigid. And even if the inspiration wanted to divert, the mind would say, ah, but this is so important, I can't skip it. I have to bring it in. And after this experience, I said to myself, there's something wrong I'm doing by making a structure that is so rigid. And I don't know how it worked. Now the memory is a little blurred, but from that point, I realized the state in which you are is far more important than the preparation that you're doing with using the mind and the intelligence. Because at the end of the day, you're going to rely on something higher that's going to fill. Even if you speak with your intellect or through your intellect, the thing which is transmitted has to be more than the intellect. For that to transmit, you have to be in the state relevant for that to flow. What is that? And it brought me back to that particular experience where I was completely blank. To the extent of, even as an instrument, saying, I'm unable to think, I'm unable to speak, I'm unable to, but I open myself with full trust. So this particular factor you will find is in the second Chatushtaya, which is primarily one of amplification of power and the working of the Shakti in you and the faith in the Shakti. And this faith particularly is of something of immense value. If you look back at many of the examples I've given, whenever there was this kind of a crisis, something internally was still certain that whatever is required to be done would be done. I don't, but she can. Or it's not my problem anymore. It's her problem. She's going to deal with it. Or even if she does not, it's no more my problem. At worst, those guys will say, hey, what a useless fellow. He gave something useless. We don't call him ever again, which has also happened perhaps, but for other reasons. And it's okay. I don't care. But that trust is like a base in which the free flow can happen more easily. The action can be more, your receptivity is better. The action can be more direct. But in this particular case, I noticed the preparation involved in thinking, making notes, structuring the thoughts itself prevented that flexibility and the clarity, a blank slate of receptivity. So in the record of yoga, we read, I think last time, a portion where Sri Aurobindo actually says, I think we read last time, where he says that at least 4 times it has happened in my life. No, I think we didn't read it here. Okay. At least four things, and it has happened 4 times it has happened in my life that I had to clear all that I built up and start afresh. Interesting. In the sadhana, he's not speaking of his external life. In the sadhana, as a result of whatever work you do, growth, etc., you have built up certain things, and then he says you have to wipe everything and start from scratch. Of course, you have the capacity, but the built up structures as if have to be wiped out so that you can build afresh with a new spontaneous framework. And this, looking back, I find to be essential in time, not immediately, but in time, this ability to be able to wipe yourself clean, free, fresh, so that you can be rebuilt. It's painful. It's painful because the very things which are your strength, you're required to let go, give up, and dissolve, or even break sometimes. Think about it. What is your greatest strength today? You look at this thing with pride, you say, I am this, I have this, I can do this, this is what is respected by people, whatever it is. And then if you're told, now break all this, why would I do that? And then if you have to, even, or you find it's now insufficient, it's not doing good, or it's doing more harm than good, and you have to break it, it's painful because it's as if you're breaking a part of yourself because you identify with that strength so much. But now you notice how this very fact is your indicator of how that strength is preventing, is the rigidity which is resisting the free action of the Shakti and the recasting, reshaping of your whole being. And you see, necessarily we go through phases. I'll try to explain how this works. You are at a certain grade, level, capacity of consciousness, let's say. Because of that particular imprint of your temperament, capacity, tendencies, thoughts, belief systems, etc., you can only grow in a particular way. You can't grow in a totally different way. Okay. So the work is done in you to grow in the direction corresponding to your current temperament, tendency, capacity, interest, etc. You build that. And of course, you're very happy. Oh, I've grown so much. But now there's a different direction of growth which is required, which is not held in your current development, which is not held in your temperament, in your capacities, in your habits, in your likes or dislikes. But you could continue to grow in this. It would be an unbalanced, insufficient, incomplete, and at some point would be your weakness because you're too rigid in this. And so at some point, if something has to be grown in a different direction, this as if has to be broken, dissolved, or at least abstracted to its essence around which to rebuild in a new form. In any case, of course, you never lose what you have developed. Any growth in consciousness is never lost. So in any case, you will not lose, but it will be built in a new form, in a new way, in a new value system, even in a new sense of I. Your sense of identity itself will undergo a radical shift. And you should be willing to make that transition if you're in the yoga, especially in the integral yoga. So it's not going to happen very often, but when it does, and you'll see, you will know it because everything in the circumstances will squeeze and crush you in the very places where you're strongest. And you will know that it's painful, it's difficult, but you will know that this is a reference. It's a sign that some change has to be made. Some transition is happening, will happen, is necessary even, where things have to be let go. Initially, you cling, you stick to that because you know it's your strength. Why would you let go? For example, there's a passage I shared many times that my temperament is to go through knowledge first. Others have a temperament to go through action or power first and then gain knowledge. In my case, knowledge. And then any opening to power or action always involves some dilution or loss of purity of knowledge. So temperamentally, I hesitate entering those spaces. If I have to, it has to maintain purity. And if it does not, I will tend to disengage. I can't do an action or an exercise in authority or power which is mixed. I can't just, that's your strength. That's your biggest weakness also. You see how it works. So there will be a transition point where, for example, you'll have to do action or exercise authority or power with all mixtures and sometimes even the worst mixtures. So you are, because you never trained, you never developed that side, you are exercising authority, you find yourself raising your voice, you find yourself getting upset, disturbed, agitated, losing your balance. Why? Because you never trained for it. So you have to now go through that as your training. So life will compel a situation where you have to do all that. And through that will be your training now to learn to now find your equality, find your deeper balance, find the center of your life energy. So if I have to use now the technical term of yoga, in the mind, there is the Purusha of mind, the status of the witness of the mind, Manomaya Purusha, we will say. Well, in the vital, there is a Pranamaya Purusha. Through that disturbance, through that agitation, through those difficulties, you'll be forced to now find that poise. And from there, you'll find the equality in the prana and then learn to exercise prana from that poise of equality, equivalent to what you did or trained in the mind, for example. But in making this transition, you'll have to first be pulled into the muck and confusion cloud and the mess that you have been avoiding all this while. And at that point, while you may do it with a lot of resistance over many, many years, through many small nudges, you might develop a little bit. Or at some point, you realize, well, this is what is required. And if you're conscious, this is what the Shakti is working on in you, you allow it to happen. Literally, it means letting go of those blocks and barriers and boundaries which you've held back and say, okay, I'm going to accept the mixture, the distortion, the consequences. And even if it's not comfortable, in order to grow through it. But you're clear of where you have to go. Maybe you don't always know in the form where you have to go, but you know that where you have to go is eventually to acquire the necessary mastery and transparency in all parts. This is obvious. And the fact that you avoided this, prevented this layer, for example, it could be the other way for the other person who starts with action, power, and then he has to enter knowledge and the clouding happens. He will resist. He will have to hold back action until he has clarity of knowledge. He will struggle against that whole difficulty. But he has to accept it if this has to happen. But once you accept, you find things start moving much faster. So the rigidity innate to you, which is around the very strength, now becomes your weakness. And you have to be willing at some point to let go. So I'm sharing this in some detail because it helps. It's a deep truth which applies in many different ways in many different stages of our life. So coming to that example, something changed. With that, there was a better blending of the emotional with the mental, and even the clarity of what was transmitted through emotions began then to grow, etc., and develop. So these were some important transitions. Still, I'm coming to the other examples of the Vyapti and Prakamya. One of the interesting passages of learning was what happens when you are online. You were used to standing in front of a group, you sense, you feel, you see visually their response, you see them yawning or you see them interested, you feel their enthusiasm or you feel their boredom. It's visible objectively, but also energetically you feel because you're close energetically. But when you're online, you don't have the same closeness energetically, and maybe you don't see anybody. So I've been on these types of Zoom calls where you could see everybody in a conference type situation. And many people are in their homes, they are lounging, relaxing, almost daydreaming while listening to the interactions going on. It's not very enthusing. You would never do that if you were sitting in a formal public space where you are required to be concentrated. But you're in your home, so the mood is very different. Does that mean they're not interested? It's difficult to feel. You don't feel energetically the contact. Or some switch off their video. Where's your link? So it was interesting, especially when the communication started with the lockdown. This was an interesting experience. I do not know if what I have experienced is the full story. At best, it's the beginning of an understanding of something. But what I found, two things which I see. First, people have learned to become more receptive while on a online chat. And second, if you are conscious, you can actually connect and feel in some way by certain different kind of maybe a finer grade of Vyapti, what is valuable on the other side? You're seeing nobody, you're feeling nobody energetically, at least not a physical energy, but you can feel in a kind of a mental grade of energy or a subtler grade of perception. And I don't know if one can always say there is a feedback because it's not always obvious, but you will feel in some way whether this is being received or not. And it's a sensitivity which can grow. But still, if you hold in yourself the idea of those around, beyond. So I was talking once to a group of students online, and the way they had set it up, I could see them initially, and then they switched it so that I could not see them anymore. Who am I talking to? What's their response? So automatically, there's some part is of reaching out, trying to feel or connect. So one does feel, one does have a sense, but you don't know them personally. It helps if some of them are known to you personally. It's as if a part of your consciousness leans to touch through those people into the larger group. So in this case, some teachers that I know, I feel, and a link is as if made through them. So it's a very interesting experience. Like I said, right now it's not yet a complete experience, but I'm showing you the direction it could perhaps grow into. You see, for me, it was always an important question that, see, my teacher goes to the mother and says, "We have received a telegram from so and so person. He is sick. He is asking for blessings." And mother does what she has to do, and then they get a telegram, he is dramatically improved. And I asked myself this question: how does mother know who is this person, where he is, what is his sickness, what is the intervention needed for curing? Nobody knows. You've just got a name. Someone has sent a telegram. Maybe there's just a first name, there's not even a second name. Or in one case, my teachers went to the mother and said, his sister is having this difficulty. Now, at that point, she had never met the mother. Mother had never physically met her. What is it that allows the mother to feel and know where she is, or what is the kind of help and how to direct it to her? So this I learned in a very different way initially through when I understood how the remote viewing works. And it's interesting in the remote viewing, the technology, when they were playing with these types of issues, one of the things they saw was you were asked to remote view a question. Let's say somebody says, I have placed a question. So I'll give an example, real example. So there's this military guy who came to the remote viewers in the United States. And he said, I have written a question in a sealed envelope. I have brought it with me. And can you give me an answer to that? So it was always supposed to be double blind. Ideally, even the person should not know, but at least he will not say anything, and it is in a sealed envelope. And they have to answer with the remote view, whatever the question is. And then he comes to them and he realizes, oh, I forgot to put it in my pocket. I didn't bring it. It's sitting there in my house. So the remote viewer said, no problem. They formulated the wording for what it is they want to remote view. We want to remote view the answer to the question that this person has written in an envelope which is sitting in his house. Now for this, you don't need to know where his house is. Interesting. Now you could take it one level further. And this is another example given in the remote viewing. This person went to Japan. One of these big names, I don't remember now who it was. I read a few books, so one of them. He describes how he goes to Japan and there's going to be a live demonstration of remote viewing in which many people are present in the audience. 5 at random are called, and out of those 5, they select some places. And out of those, by random call, one of the places is picked up. The person from the audience who picks that up does not know where it is. He goes out from the studio. After so many minutes, opens the paper. There's a location. He goes to that particular location. At a fixed time, he has to be on that location. Now, at that time, this person is supposed to remote view and describe where he is. So there is no way you could have known in advance because the whole thing is being done through a series of random jumps. So he's in the studio and the person goes to that location. And then the remote viewer says, you know what? I was not sure if I would be able to hold my concentration as needed under the stress of the studio environment and all these different parameters you have set. So last night before sleeping, I sat down and I did a remote viewing of what will be the location that the person selected by the audience will be at the particular time when I'll be asked to remote view. Something. He formulates in this way and he gets a drawing. So at that point, he pulls out in his envelope the drawing he prepared the night before, and it's exactly the place the person was. So what I understood through these examples, and then to some extent through the experience, is that from the point of view of the self is everywhere. In the self, the perfect knowledge is held. But still, I'll ask, we are not in self. Where is the link being made? So in this case, my teacher goes and says, my sister is sick. In his consciousness is the link to his sister. The mother picks up the link through his consciousness. There's a telegram that has come. Even my teacher does not know who it is. The name is there and the link forms. The person who sent the telegram, wherever he is, that's enough to pinpoint in the totality of the self where the person is. Now, once you get to this, I'm going into some detail, you understand fundamentally there is no limitation on you having a perception of Vyapti or a feedback of Vyapti. Fundamentally, in principle at least. In practice, it may be a question of two things. Let's say, generally your sensitivity and receptivity, but the other, which is more critical, your faith or lack of faith, or rather your doubt. When you tell yourself, oh, I can't do because, that belief in you or that faith in you or that negative faith in you is your barrier which you have put. Repeatedly, you'll find in the record of yoga, and we will come across these in examples when we see more of Sri Aurobindo, he keeps saying, he refers to the ashraddha, the negative faith, the contrary faith, the loss of faith that through which he has to operate and act. So it's fascinating that your preconception, your expectation, your lack of faith is causing the gap. I remember another time when I was speaking to Mark Ubern about something, and there was a particular program I was doing at that point with a certain group, a small number of group. And he said, you know what, you should be able to do with 50. I said, no, I can't do it. It's too much. I cannot manage 50. And he came back with a very sharp retort. He said, that is your preconception which is preventing you from it. You can very well do 50. You can do 1,000. You can do 10,000. Okay, there was an exaggeration there. But then I said, why am I even thinking like that? What if I accept it true? And I just let the formation dissolve and open myself to that possibility. Or if I put it in other words which are more accessible, I will say, I try to find in myself the part in which I knew this is true. And with that, it's as if I touched the faith. I have not got it fully. I touched the faith that yes, it's true. It does not matter what the number is. It's possible, irrespective of number. I touched it, and then there would be a process of as if drawing out, extending it, embedding it in the thoughts, in the emotions, in the parts, in the actions, in everywhere. But the moment I touched it, I knew, yes, it is true. There's a work to be done still, but it is true. And maybe in the work to be done, the faith is drawn out bit by bit. And I realized, yeah, by 50 is not a big deal. And it helped because I didn't start with 50. I compared with his 10,000. I said, yeah, 10,000 is a big deal. 50 is nothing compared to that. Yes, doable. And this you will find again is critically the part of the second limb of the framework of the integral yoga, the working of the Shakti of the Divine Mother in you, the force of the Mother's force, and the faith in her working and her full capacity and in your potential full capacity under her working. That complete total faith has to be built. And in the parts where the faith is contrary, it says, no, I cannot do it, it's actually not possible, is where you find the resistance. So I'm sharing this as an example in the context of what it's like when you are online. If you start by saying, It's not possible. I don't have the feedback. Well, you have set your parameters and limited yourself. When you say in the self, all is possible, and whatever the feedback is needed, even if I'm not sensitive enough, I will feel, or I will get an indication in some way, in some part in me, reflected from the self or wherever it is, in whatever form it comes, because in the self is there. You trust, open to that, and then let that happen. And bit by bit, if nothing else, the thing will grow. Of course, it helps because many people are. If the content is, if you're online, there's a response because the audience listening is also putting out a certain energy. So there is a response. It's just your lack which is preventing you from seeing it. So these were some interesting learning experiences. I want to end with one which goes into a bit of a personal space. So I was hesitating how much to speak of it, but we'll just do it. And this is with regard to transmission of an experience. So we are warned in the spiritual tradition, you never speak of a personal spiritual experience because you will lose the power that is in the experience which you're holding. This I've experienced not once, many times, the loss of the power when you speak prematurely. On the other hand, you also find the mother specifically records this. She says, when she's asked, should you speak? She says, it's a question of a choice. If you feel in the balance that your loss will be someone's gain, and in the balance, the gain is more than the loss, then it's worthwhile. If the loss is more than the gain, it's not worthwhile. Something to that effect, she says. I'm putting it in my own words. And this I found to be valuable as an indication. So sometimes it would happen that someone has a difficulty and I'm saying, well, what can it work? Let's try, let's explore. Sometimes it happens spontaneously. There's an interest, compulsion in your nature, or sometimes an inspiration that says, okay, something needs to be done here. And you do what you can. And you learn from it. Other times, no, whatever. Maybe you were not transparent, but whatever it was, there was a strong no in your nature, in your habit, preconceptions, and maybe an opportunity is missed. But when it has happened, I've learned some interesting things through that. I'll give one of the very unusual examples, which was I had gone abroad, somebody who was in hospital in a very serious condition. He was unconscious, and for several weeks he had not recovered. They expected that he had gone vegetal, that is, the brain was no more functioning. And because it was such a powerful, important instrument, I felt I had to do what I can. I don't know what I can do, but I'll do what I can. So I reached into him. I concentrated, as if reaching deep as I can go within him, and to speak to his inmost person. And I whispered in his ear. I said some things which I felt were necessary to help him to make that effort to come out. And if he wants to come out, he can. Maybe he does not, or he is lost in some swoon. So awaken that, pull that, and draw that out. So I reached as deep as I could, said what I had to make that and indicate to him what is needed. And then, as if on return, I pulled and held the pull, a state of tension of the contact. I left that place and the pull was there still. It's like holding an elastic. And it was there unconsciously at some level. It was always there. I came back. I was abroad. I came back. 2 weeks passed, 3 weeks passed. And then I had heard nothing from the family. So I said, and I told them before going, please give me feedback of what's happened. I want to know. 2 reasons. I want to know whether this worked, and generally. Nothing came. So something within me already said, it didn't work. It was not useful. I said, let me check. So I wrote to the person in the family. I said, please give me feedback. How is he doing? And the mail which came back was, oh, Sraddhalu ji, he needs your prayers. He needs everybody's prayers, something very general like that, which I interpreted to mean nothing has changed. It was a mistake. I said, okay, so whatever was attempted did not work. And I let go of that link. Yes, okay, it's attempt gone, over, I move on. Okay. Lesson learned, it doesn't work, or at least this thing did not work. Later, I visited them, and soon after I got news he had passed away. So later when I met them again, I said, tell me what happened. Was there any sign? He said, yes, soon after you left, he had actually recovered consciousness. He was improving for about a week or two. And then suddenly there was a decline, and then he left. And I said to myself, wow, never presume, verify. And if the verification is ambiguous, cut through, verify, ask specifics. So there's only so much you can do in certain contexts, but where you can, you should ask. Because sometimes you may be used without you knowing what is being done. The Shakti, the grace, needs a physical instrument as a link to the patient or the person who is not directly receptive at that moment. If he was, she would have acted directly. He is not receptive. So a receptive instrument who is a good connection with whom this person has a rapport or who can reach in and make that link is now the via media, like a bridge. So again, looking back, we find many times the mother actually gave that as an advice to people. Somebody was very sick and mother told her, the attendant of that person, I will be working through you on that person. Now you could ask, why isn't she working directly on the sick person? Obviously, there's a lack of receptivity of some kind. But this person being there made a possible an amplification of the help, and there was a dramatic improvement. So you never know when you might be used as an instrument consciously. Sometimes it may happen spontaneously, sometimes it may not happen. I generally never imagine or assume such a position. I'm not going to get into healing and that sort of thing. The healers, that their job, maybe it's more complicated for them. But it happened in this way. Verify, verify, never presume. Even if there is a help, it may not be the way you expect it. And maybe the help given is for what the soul wants and not what you think the soul should want, isn't it? But the help will be there. And when you feel it, if you're conscious of it, trust the grace, trust the experience, and do not allow your preconceptions to interfere. So I'm generalizing from this to other things, other experiences, which also I found. I'll describe something which worked in a very interesting way. And this is the working of the prakamya. In this case, a blending from the Vyapti prakamya to the Ishit to the to Aishwarya or Vashita. There's a point where you're blending. I'm going to discard these terms and just focus on what happens. In consciousness, you feel. In what you feel, you imprint, modify, whatever. So I have one dramatic experience which is worth sharing. Is this family had brought a young girl who was very talented apparently, but had somehow lost all interest and enthusiasm in life, and she had completely stopped. She was in a depression, and at that point, it said that she had already been on psychiatric medication for 2 years. It had not helped. And so they said, is there something you can suggest, etc. So I was sitting and I asked the girl, well, what about this? And she said, I don't know. She's looking down. So they said always she never makes eye contact. She only says, I don't know. And she's not interested in anything. So I asked a question, I don't know. She's looking down. I asked something. Before she could answer, the mother answered. I was trying to connect to her, and the mother was interfering. I asked another question. Again, the mother answered. I indicated to her to stop, and she wouldn't. So I told her, okay, now you sit outside. I need to be alone with her. And then I spoke. Again, I don't know, or silence. So you tune in. You try to feel what's in the person. You try to feel where the block is. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Doesn't matter. So you try to feel. It's as if you're taking an object and you're trying to feel around it. And then someplace there was a suggestion, or maybe it has to do with high expectations. How do you break that out? You can't say, hey, look, don't worry about other people's expectations. What is needed? And suddenly at that point, there was this flash of intuition. And I said to her, what if you left your present school and went to a completely different school in a different city where nobody knows you? And suddenly this girl looking down looks up, bright-eyed in surprise, and stays silent. I don't remember, maybe she said, I don't know, or she was silent, but she looked up for the first time, there was a response. And then I built on that. I said, hey, you go there, you'll be like this, it'll be like that. Nobody will know you. You can start fresh, no expectations from anybody. And I created that world in her consciousness. So, as you narrate, you can build that reality in a way that she starts living it. And then her eyes opened up. And but is it possible? Some response came, and then I built on that, developed it. And then I began to explain certain things. Already now the conversation had started. So then I explained certain things. I said, you know what, your energy is down. You feel that difference. You can easily bring it up in this way. One of the easiest ways is like you do a few stretches. So I said, get up now, just do it. So by then the link had formed. And whatever I was suggesting, she was open to accepting. And then she got up and said, okay, stretch your arms like this and jump. And then she jumped and she laughed. And the mother sitting outside is in a state of shock because in about half an hour, this girl who had not been talking for 2 years suddenly is jumping, laughing, and chatting. And I had a nice time with her. And then eventually we allowed the mother to come in. And then I told her something happened. But I just show this as an example. This is all therapists do this all the time. Not all are conscious. And the skill basically is of you in your gradations of consciousness, in all gradations, being able to meet on all gradations. If in you certain parts are blocked, those parts are not accessible to you in that other person. If you insert in you certain layers are open, let's say a deeper layer, even something approaching your soul's influence, you will be conscious of that grade and that influence in the other person and be able to feel it by vyapti and exercise it, influence it, draw it out, or whatever. So a lot depends on your own transparency and integration of levels of consciousness, and then the working of the Shakti using the transparency and that integration to, well, do what it needs to do through the instrument that is there. It's very interesting. And that's why you realize the necessity in the integral yoga of this full, all the layers, all the parts being awakened and then integrated and open to the Shakti. So I give this as an example of what it can, it was a transmission finally of an experience. Finally, it's always that, is transmission. And I'll leave with one example of the spiritual kind of experience, which I'll leave it in general terms, but just to show how it works. I once was with a group in some interaction, and I was sharing a certain experience. And while sharing, obviously there's a transmission of a kind. And I felt 3.5 people had got it. I didn't know what that half meant. So afterwards, I asked feedback from each one, and 3 of them had had that experience, at least made a preliminary first touch of that experience. And the half person said, I felt that and then it vanished. Interesting. And in the way it was being done, because I was not particularly looking at them, I knew somebody there, somebody there, somebody there. And I had to open my eyes and look, who is this? And yes, it was the right person. So just to give you an example, in the consciousness, whatever state you are able to touch, reach, hold, is what is available. And there's a physical space in which the transmission can take place, the contact can take place, physically located. And it helps, of course, if there's affinity, trust, and mutual, let's say, respect and appreciation, then you're open and receptive more easily to this. But these were experiences which I'm sharing because it was a learning experience. Is it even possible to do that? My teacher would do it, but I can't do that. I don't have that gift. The mother would do it. I don't have that gift. Can I do it by describing and sharing, using words? And so I found, yes, that also works. Of course, a lot depends on how you do it. So to the extent that within you, the continuity is built from that state to the surface and to the part which speaks or transmits, to that extent, the transmission can be more complete. I'll leave it at that as. But in summary, all these are happening to us all the time. We're conscious or we're not conscious. Depending on how much we grow, how much we integrate, how much we're transparent, the action can be done more or less. And of course, there's the receptivity on the other side. If you choose to, and if you have this aspiration, consciously open to the Shakti, when you have to help somebody, let her work in you. Sometimes you will know, sometimes you will feel very specific intervention took place. Sometimes you'll feel something happened, but I don't know what. Sometimes you may feel nothing, but still something might have been done. So these were some experiences I wanted to share. They're very basic, preliminary, but they show you that in principle, all of us have these faculties or abilities, and they can be refined and developed. So I'll look at the chat box quickly for a few questions. So Aspirer says, that's the same thing that happens with me while waiting for the descent. After some time, when I feel the descent, I get so sleepy, I don't know what to do. Sri Aurobindo, in fact, advised somebody, it's in the letters. Someone said, I am unable to sleep. Sri Aurobindo writes to him, says, read the Life Divine. Now, you might take it as a joke. It's not a joke, it's very serious. So what happens to this person? When he starts reading the Life Divine, it resonates with layers within him which are still subliminal. He's pulled into this inner or higher state, or at least that part becomes more active than the outer. And the moment he shifts there, the outer body consciousness with which it is not integrated says, yes, now it's time to sleep, and starts getting sleepy. So I connected to Aspirer's experience. When the descent happens, after a while, you start getting sleepy. Why? Because you're being pulled into a state or a part of you which is not integrated with your surface. Two things to do. First, train the body. Tell it, this is a different experience. This is not sleep. So don't fall asleep. Second, consciously become familiar with that state and drift back to the waking surface layer. Drift back to the state, drift back to the waking layer, go back and forth. It's something I've recommended many times in other discussions. When you go back and forth, you're building a continuity. So you're sleepy. At that point, instead of saying, I'm sleepy, I'm going to get up and stop this, I'll say, no, can I bring this, what I'm feeling, all the way to the part in the surface? Notice you've been interiorized. Now slowly exteriorize, open your eyes. Or hold that inner state and open your eyes and hold this. Even if it's sleepy, hold with your eyes open. Feel and let the imprint of that experience now soak into those surface layers. And then if you do this back and forth movement, initially you'll just find two states. Then you'll find you can shift back and forth. There's a point very quickly where you'll find you can hold the full intensity without having the sleepiness on the surface. But then you can even build intensity, and you'll find that inner part to which you were pulled, where the outer part got sleepy, you're able to hold that with full awareness. Even the quality of awareness that grows. And that's how you're pushing the boundary of the limb, the boundary of your conscious awareness into the subliminal or the superconscious ranges. So you say, I don't know what to do. Explore with this. This will help a lot. Revati is saying, my experience with the evening series is interesting, as if like I literally draw nourishment from these 2 hours. It's more so with the live series than compared with the recorded series. So this is, again, an experiment I had done initially when we did the recordings. The question was, does it make a difference if you listen to it live or if you listen to it afterwards? And I got 2 different responses. For some, it made a big difference when it was live, because in a sense, at that moment, simultaneously, I think currently about 70 or 80 people are in the same alignment, in the same sharing of aspiration. So it makes a difference. There are others who said, yes, but I find if I can receive almost the same thing even afterwards. And this can happen when, and again, remember, in the self, all is present. What happened even 2 days ago is still present in the self. So when you tune in to the presence, to the aspiration, to this collective yajna, in a sense, it's still present in the self. So it's just displaced in time. In the self, it doesn't matter. Space or time, displacement doesn't matter. And so you can still feel it. It's just a different kind of displacement, a different kind of attunement. It's possible. But there's a difference still. And the difference is this, and I'm again showing you, you're close to someone, there's a range in which a substantial vitality is present. You go far enough, you don't feel that substance of vitality. Now, depending on the person, it may be wider or narrower, but there is a distance after which the vital substance fades. And the same thing happens in time. There is a time after which, as if a certain material density of certain vibrations can tend to fade. Unless you've already acquired it before, then you can as if retune into that. But otherwise, so there can be a difference on those layers, which are more material, on the material vibrations. So observe, and maybe you can play with it and find how what works. So Sanjana is asking, how does one invoke, hold, and transmit the presence in material through art, poetry, film, etc.? So film, I will not say much right now because that's more complex. It involves often many people, including sometimes an editor who will be working on the thing, a cameraman who will work on the thing. So you may have a conception which is implemented by them. If your team is good, it can amplify. Your conception may be partial. The cameraman adds dimensions which you could not have thought, which amplify. But you have to all be aligned to the particular goal. So often what they go through is they sit down and describe what is the kind of experience we want to create, what is the kind of mood we want to create, and everyone is aligned to that. Or often you may throw out a cameraman and get another who is better aligned to this type of mood, whereas that one is better aligned to a different kind of mood. If you build the team properly or in a shared mood, then you can do something very powerful and dramatic. But it requires many people. Whereas art and poetry, you may not require somebody else, so it's more easy. So still, she's asking, invoke, hold, and transmit the presence in material. You don't even need to have created something. Let's say you're holding an object. When you invoke the presence within you, hold, and you're holding the object, automatically it is being held in you. It receives something of your state, which is how somebody who's sensitive can pick up that object and describe your personality because it's filled with you. One of the problems you'll notice, all of us are nowadays carrying mobile phones in our hands all the time, practically. You notice those of you who are sensitive, if you pick up somebody else's mobile phone, you're often very uncomfortable. It's almost as if you're touching their physical, vital vibrations materially, intimately. And sometimes it may feel uncomfortable. So you're all the time anyway infusing in things which you use. So the infusion happens. The difference now would be you might infuse consciously. You hold, let's say you hold a stone, you infuse consciously with affection. Observe a mother who's making food for her child with a certain intention. I want his health to be improving. So as she rolls the pin for making a chapati, she's putting her vitality, putting her affection. The movement is instinctive. We all have it. When you care, when you love, when you want to give, you're doing it anyway. So observe that and then do it consciously. You're writing a letter to somebody with a lot of affection. You're anyway pouring that affection in the letter, isn't it? If you're writing by hand. If you're writing with keyboard, it doesn't have the same force. Because the movement is not commensurate to the force you're trying to transmit. Whereas in writing, you're forced to move and really infuse in the detail of the movement. Keyboard, you dictate, may not have the same force. Speech may have a different force because it carries nuances. But dictated text won't have the same force. So observe this as far as infusing. Invoke and hold, it's then a question of familiarity and practice. The fact that you remember a state, the fact that you pull yourself consciously into that state, deepen, intensify as you are immersed. Through practice, the state can become more familiar and then you may be able to infuse it. So I'm going to reverse this question a little bit and say, if this is happening to us all the time anyway, unconsciously, consider how much time and energy you put in what quality of consciousness and state. If you're grouchy, moody, upset, critical all the time, you are receiving, holding, and transmitting your grouchy, moody, unhappy state in your own body, because you're holding your body, isn't it, at the very least? And then in materials, in circumstances, somebody might come into your room and say, oh, what is this dark vibe? Because you've spread it all over. How much of your life is going into that kind of quality of consciousness or grade or mood, or in something else higher, deeper, truer, more beautiful? Observe, make a choice. Make a choice to spend more time in the positive and more beautiful, and reduce. And even If you're in a negative mood, do not amplify, do not infuse, do not hold. Choose to let it go. Do not identify with it, saying it is mine, it is me. Okay. Rajesh is asking about transmitting what people can receive. Is it why Abrahamic prophets and others did things that seem barbaric to people today? I don't think it's just that. It's not as if they came down to a level. It's probably what those prophets were capable themselves of receiving or transmitting. So in a group, if there is a afflatus divine action willing, aiming to help a group, whoever is receptive catches and through him something may be done. But maybe his receptivity itself is so mixed, diluted, or even distorted. You can't say that they are doing it deliberately. More often than not, that's all they were capable of receiving. And it would apply anywhere in any circumstance. I give an example here. His mother observed this. When there was the Chinese incursion in India, 1961, I believe, 61 or 62, the Chinese invaded India and came in quite a bit. And thanks to Nehru, India was totally unprepared. Even the soldiers didn't have proper weapons, equipment, they were freezing. And so the mother intervened. She put her force to protect India and to end this war. And then she said the Chinese were more receptive. They just withdrew, went back, just as they came. The Indian side was less receptive, she said. Why? Inertia, lack of readiness, lack of capacity, lack of whatever it was. But it's interesting that when the force acts, it works and operates through whatever is available as instruments. Think about it. Today, right now, the supramental consciousness is here active in the world's evolution. You are there as one of the receivers, potentially. To what extent are you receptive? You're not even conscious of it. How will you receive it? At best, you are receiving a reflection of a reflection. At best. At worst, you are receiving a reflection of reflection of reflection of reflection. At best, reflection of reflection, there are two reductions. It passes before we can typically touch when it is touched as a finite and more mentalized, limited consciousness or intuitivized mind consciousness. That we can touch. So imagine what happens. You can't say that you are reducing it to help others. Your capacity to receive itself is so weak, limited, isn't it? But if you could build on that, if you could now use that point of contact and deepen and open more, so much more could happen because it is there. It can do what it wants to do. Vaibhav is saying, Vaibhav, even with your background, you had to struggle with not being able to disengage in your life decades ago. Happy that is way behind now. Personally, still struggling with this. No, let me challenge you, put it another way. The challenge that life throws at you will always catch you in your weakest and least capable part. You may think you've done this, now it's over, now we've gone beyond it, but there's a little corner which was left weak, insufficient, undeveloped, or somehow closed, and eventually life will knock you right there exactly where, and it'll topple you because that part was undeveloped. It may be brief, it may be short duration, it may not be, or it may not last too long. It'll still topple you in that moment when it catches you by surprise and you find you're unable to deal with it because that corner. And take an extreme example, Sri Aurobindo himself. Remember, there's in one of the conversations, Sri Aurobindo is asked about the Ananda, and he says that is there constantly. You can draw upon it instantly, you can tune in and open to that state of Ananda all the way into the physical consciousness. Not a big deal for him. Even when stung by a scorpion, even when there's physical pain, heat, burning, the body can experience Ananda. Not a problem. He has brought it to that point. Then he points out when he had that accident where he fell and broke the thigh bone, the intensity of that pain was so great that he could not convert it back into the Ananda, which is the truth behind all experience, all sensation. He could not get back to it. It was so intensely painful. And it took him a while to get to that poise. Interesting. So if that be the case, of course, it is on something which is way beyond anything we can conceive of. The point being, that's the nature of reality. Until the whole of your consciousness is fully perfected and divinized, there'll always be little corners where you'll get knocks and things. I would simply say when it happens, not if it happens. When it happens, and it can happen to anyone, it can happen to me right now. When it happens, take it in the spirit. This is helping me become conscious of a part where I was not sufficiently equal, detached, strong, organized, integrated with my soul aspiration, etc. One of the things you will notice, and I'm going to state this very explicitly, you're in a state where you know and feel the divine presence and help and know its truth. When that disturbance comes, emotional, otherwise, whatever stress, and you fall into that state or that part, notice you don't have this familiarity and spontaneous trust in the divine. There you have a doubt, there you have a problem, there you feel distant, there you feel abandoned, or there you even forget that there is such a thing as the divine presence. Notice the state. When you shift back to this state, yes, of course it's there. Why would I ever doubt it? You shift or fall into this state, what is this divine? Oh yeah, of course it's there. I don't know if she has a divine mother has abandoned me. No, she has not abandoned you. You don't feel her. Because of this part which does not feel her, you're identified with this part. But if in this part, when you're not feeling her, you bring whatever you can of the remembrance and make the effort to open, then you're building now the link to those parts where you already feel and know. In you already that part exists. Build the link to that part. Let its faith, so to say, seep into this part. Let you open to your own higher part and through that to her. And if you do it like this, you'll find it quite easy. I'm not saying very easy, quite easy or much more easy than fighting and struggling with yourself and by yourself. Find the part in you where already that is known and felt, held and felt. Make this link. It's a short link. It's not too far. If you could fall from there to here in an instant, you can also recover. Maybe climb is harder, but you can recover, maybe not in an instant, maybe in a few minutes of effort. You can recover partially. Hold that partial link. And that's how you'll find this fall can be made a means, as Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, for a greater rise. And the fall itself was needed, inevitable, because that part was not sharing in the higher experience. And Baba says we have to align ourselves with the self-referencing, self-expressing, self-evolving states of material intelligence. I'm not sure what you mean. Shiva says, interesting that some public speaking trainers ask speakers to look into the eyes of the audience, or if it's a large group, feel the group emotionally and connect at the heart level as well. Yes, so there are many such techniques which are taught. And what I'm trying to show you here is the technique is an indirect way to make the contact. If it helps you, sure, use it, but don't be bound to the technique. If you were, as a speaker, trained to look in people's eyes and suddenly you have to now connect with them online, you'll be totally lost. So if you have to do that, well, look at them, but feel the link, the contact made as a consequence of whatever external devices you have used. Feel them, feel the space you're holding. And then when you do that, you'll find you don't lose it with or without those means. Vaibhav says we have to unlearn all the junk we absorbed from our parents and our caregivers who were instrumental of various forces in the childhood. Yes, maybe, but it's not just them. You have to unlearn so much which you yourself may have built as a habit from the past, even from past lives. So I would suggest don't worry too much about what you have to unlearn and what you have to learn. Don't make a big issue out of it. Rather, at this point, what do you have to do? What can you grow? Where can you become more free, open, and flexible to the relationship with the Divine Shakti in opening to her? And where you feel there's a part which is rigid, you say, okay, now this part maybe it'll take a little while, but let me start with the easier parts. And meanwhile, this also will soften up and open. Just go with what is available at this moment. And don't worry too much about the big picture. See, if you look at it this way, when your goal is to reach infinity, and the supermind is consciousness of infinity, as long as you're in finite consciousness, you'll always say, oh, it's impossible. Because the infinite is infinitely more than the finite. How will you ever get to it if you take small steps? That's not how it works. When you take small steps and open a little bit, the infinite leans and fills you and opens you to its infinity suddenly, and then withdraws and leaves you back. Because you're elastic, you fall back. But with repeated touches of the infinite, you become more and more elastic, more and more open, until at some point the familiarity is so strong, you begin to long for it, yearn for it, and the memory of the infinite is a living force in you. And that's when it can begin to make a permanent bridge, a point of contact first, and then gradually widening. It will do in you far more rapidly than you can do of your own. So don't ever think in terms of, oh, I will need so many years. Yes, of course, you will need so many years with your own strength. That's not the method of the integral yoga. The method is to open to the higher and let it shape you, isn't it? So focus on that much more. Don't worry about unlearning. Rather, in that moment, whatever needs to be freed, you will free as much as you can. And trust that you will be helped as the things unfold. Uh, Anton says your reference is to EWS 168, 53, 47. Yeah, maybe. The numbers which I said were what I viewed and found, but whatever works, you'll find the event described there. Shanta is asking, is distant healing related to Vyapti? Yes, of course. But there are two kinds. Remember, we have spoken of the inferior form in which intermediate beings are used. So there was this fellow called John of God. I think it was in Brazil, and he was doing all kinds of healings with these beings. And the beings would do it, and they would take their pound of flesh, so to say, in return. Then it is their Vyapti. You may have nothing. But where you are doing it consciously without the intermediary of such beings, then obviously there is a contact of consciousness, always, in some form of other. And it can be as indirect as the examples I gave of the remote viewers. You can say, this person with the name of this living at this address from whom the letter has come. That may be enough. Or the touch of the letter might be enough even without looking at the name of the person, if that be the skill you have. So a lot depends on the skill. Edgar Casey, in his readings had many examples of, demonstrated many examples of this. There will be a letter which will come. A first name from a particular state. John from Arizona, let's say, is asking this in his life, he's facing this difficulty. And after a moment, pause, Edgar Casey would say, yes, we have him before us. You've made the contact, now the person is available, and he'll start describing what the person is. So if all is held in the self, it doesn't matter. You may even hold the idea of the person and do something, and it will still have an effect. So the Vyapti's capacity depends on which layer, which grade of consciousness, which layer in terms of surface or inner, and which poise you hold. If you're in self, the Vyapti is always complete, irrespective of time and space. If you're in mind, the Vyapti is that much reduced. If you're in emotions, it is different in quality, etc. But it's always a functioning of the Vyapti faculty, isn't it? So the secret will still be go deeper, wider in the freer closeness to self, whatever takes you in that direction. And from there, you can hold and feel and connect or help in whatever way you need to, more directly, more easily. On the other hand, when you're closer to the material, you're able to convey material substance in the help, vital substance in the help. So depending on the nature of the illness, you may need that substance. So the best instrument would be one who can touch the grades of the self and the self influence integrated all the way to the vital and physical. Then that Vyapti in which the self holds the patient can use this material also to reach out the help. Those are the ones who make often the best healers, the most effective. In purely material terms, those who have the lower grade of vitality and substance are those who make dramatic results. But the miraculous results which involve influence of the self are those who have both and integrated. Rajarsi says maybe the ideas of a Jedi Force were inspired by spirituality. This is from Star Wars. Yes, absolutely. Star Wars was written and conceived by people who had read the Mahabharata. They were familiar with the Indian knowledge systems and spiritual systems, and particularly the idea that evil is nothing but good which has been perverted. And that is very strongly shown in the Star Wars series. So they drew a lot from these ideas. I think that's all for today. There are many more questions, but I will keep it for next time. I would like to suggest that while this is a very personal kind of sharing, I've tried to limit myself to things which would be of help and would be practical. But particularly to illustrate that all of us have this. And it's just a question of becoming conscious. Not all of us might pursue it. I did not consciously pursue it, except in the way of developing skills where I found it was needed or where it was ineffective and I had to fill something. That's about all. But the bulk of it I let happen as it happened, which is not the best way either. But well, that was the way I felt right, because my hesitation always was, if I make a personal effort, the nature of the personal effort itself feels wrong. It's too much of me. And I don't even know if that's the right thing to do and whether it's aligned to the will of the divine. And that prevented from making effort. Whereas those who made effort often might have dramatically better development, but it may be warped in some way. So you have to find your balance. You have to find what works with you. But in time, whatever your starting point, you'll end up with the complementary aspect and flow. There will come a time, even if you begin like this hesitantly, that there will come a time when you will feel the Shakti working in you, lifting you and shaping you, or working through you and helping someone with just you as the instrument to provide the material needed, the hand needed to hold another hand and pull. But you are not the one pulling, it is she who acts through you. And that is the most happy and the most perfect condition, to be a transparent instrument. You're a child in her arms, she works through you and she integrates what needs to be done in you. She works through you to help others in the way needed, and you are free because you're free of all responsibility. It's her working. That's, of course, the happiest condition, as Sri Aurobindo describes in that little booklet, The Mother. So let's all aspire for the growth increasingly of this as our state in our relationship with the Mother, and also that she may act in us and through us directly as much as possible, and hold that as our aspiration, to become transparent to her working directly in us, directly through us, where necessary.